Hi, everyone, and welcome to our fireside chat today. We're here to talk about cloud-based transformation and how you can get powerful ways to reinvent your business. Unfortunately, so many people are missing out on some of the benefits they could be reaping from cloud. So we're here to discuss a few of those things. So I'm Kris Torres. I'm the director of our Cloud Innovation Center out of Dallas, Texas. And I've brought Stu with me so we could chat a little bit about how we unlock this potential. So Stu, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kris. Hey, everybody. Stuart Brown. I am the North American Microsoft Business Group lead for Accenture. So that means all the work that we do in US and Canada with Microsoft. So that's a big chunk, including our with our Avanade organization that we joined there with Microsoft. Most of the global CTO with that group. So really setting the tech agenda of what cloud means. And obviously cloud's, we'll talk about this, but cloud is ubiquitous from across the business now. It's not just infrastructure anymore.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here with me, Stu. And as we go along, we'd love for you to jump in with your questions and comments in the chat. So if something comes up while we're talking that you want to learn more about, just drop it in there. So to get everything warmed up, let's make sure your chat's working. So if you can drop in where you're coming from, what city you're from, and maybe what company you're at as well, and drop those in the chat for us. See, we got a good crew from Austin. So there we go. Okay, great. And Stu, it looks like you've got some fans of your Infinity Stone background. So.
Nice. I should have plugged it in. I didn't plug it in. Oh, I'm sorry. It actually lights up too. It's even cooler than that.
Oh, that's awesome. I stuck with my standard fireplace behind me.
There you go.
It's a little chilly today, so there we go. So let's get started, Stu. So there's a lot of things that cloud can mean to people. So why don't you tell us what it means to you?
Well, it's funny because, when people think cloud, they automatically think infrastructure, right? And I sort of try to say, stop thinking that way. It's, while it may run on something, that doesn't really matter anymore. I always think of cloud as services, right? And I always try to equate it to the simplest view, especially the higher up in the business I get around. Think about apps on your phone. Think about services. Apps provide services. So when I think about cloud, I think about the ability to scale services. That's the way I interpret it. So whether that be an infrastructure service, a platform development service, or whether that be a software as a service type of model, but the simple, easy, explain to your parents way to say this is something that provides a service that you need in what you need and only sort of paying for what you need and scaling for what you need when you need it. That's cloud for me. In the end, I also say that's a business enabler, right? So to me, cloud is no longer the domain of just sitting in the infrastructure world. It is a business enabler and something that needs to be strategically talked about at the top levels.
Okay, so tell us more about how you see that business enabler happening when it comes to cloud.
Well, I think, there's no greater example than the last 6 to 9 months we've dealt with, right? Which is businesses can't always predict what's going to happen. And I think the enabler side of that is, how can I get to a business model that scales with me? It's what everybody wants from a resource perspective. It's what everybody wants from a, they want to be able to scale their business based on supply and demand. And I think the idea that cloud allows you to do that in a much more secure way, but a much broader ecosystem way. Part of the big challenge for organizations, and even more so with the smaller organizations, but this also hits the bigger ones, is tapping into the ecosystem of innovation that's out there. How do I take my organization, take the best of what others are innovating, and how can I plug that in a way that is a fast to succeed, maybe a fast to fail model, so I can react to market pressures. And in the past, especially for the big organizations like we work with, that's a challenge because it was a big rat's nest of integration and proprietary systems and legacy lock-in and all those things that sort of inhibited innovation. What we've seen in the last 6 to 9 months is innovation is critical to survive, right? Not just grow, but survive in what we've been dealing with. And those companies that weren't there are moving pretty quickly. Matter of fact, today was the Microsoft Envision, which is their business-oriented conference, and we were on today. And Julie Sweet was on there with Judson Althoff from Microsoft, so our CEO and their COO, and was talking about the rapid innovations happen. Like we were expecting over the next decade, most of our clients will go. Now it's like 5 years or less. They all recognize if they don't make the move, they're going to be at a disadvantage.
I love the way that cloud too, just because it's there, right? So I can rapidly spin something up. I can try something out with my customers. I can make it available all over the world, in a real tangible way quickly. And then if it doesn't work, I just turn it off and I try something else, and I'm still getting that rapid feedback. So instead of having to like buy a server and have a purchase order and do all the things, or I have to create an entire part of my data center in order to do innovation, now I can do it. It really is at my fingertips instead of having to plan ahead of time for everything that I'm going to figure out for this year. I really can do it at the speed of business.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think that's someone has been in this game for 26 years now, right? I mean, the shift from, when you were doing projects, when you sat around a table, you were talking about OS DB kernels and OS, misalignments, and, your long pole in the tent was, getting hardware ordered and getting it racked and stacked and getting it wired and all the things. They don't have those conversations anymore. Right. And if you are having those conversations, stop having those conversations, because that's just slowing down the ability for you to realize the value. It has nothing to do with other, we talk about security and other things we're happy to talk about, but value realization in this day and age is about speed to value or speed to understand that the value is not there and move on to the next thing. And in the old way, we made bets and you had to live with them. Right. And I think to your point, that you don't need to be that way anymore.
Absolutely. Do you remember sitting around the table trying to guess what your capacity needs were over the next 3 to 5 years so you could buy the right number of servers? I remember just being like, oh God, I hope we get this much traffic. And then, Black Friday comes around and oops, you're down.
I mean, it's like building a house and adding 4 extra bedrooms because people might show up one time every 4 years. It's crazy talk, but that's how we were. That's all we had. Right. And by the way, when you made that decision, right, it wasn't like in the old days, like you make a decision to build those rooms, you're basically saying, okay, now I'm going to pay maintenance and air conditioning and heating and power and everything for those rooms for the next 4 years. You would sign up for a contract that would lock you in for 3 to 4 years. And invariably you guessed it wrong. And invariably when you needed something a year or 2 down the road, they would say, oh, well now, hey, well, what we put in is not the same as what you have now. So if you want to, you got to now upgrade your rack. And so you end up in this scenario where, someone that ran really large businesses for us, including in Texas, some of the dereg utilities, what you'd find is business started just giving up on innovation. They just gave up. They're like, look, and that's where shadow IT came from. So shadow IT came up not because IT organizations didn't want to deliver for their people. It's because the infrastructure and the mechanism and the procurement, all the things they put in place didn't allow them to. And so shadow IT was just moving to a SaaS PaaS model faster than they could move internally. And that's why shadow IT existed. And frankly, we should be the shadow IT for our own IT, right? That's the way it should.
Okay, so for those that might not be familiar with the term, shadow IT.
So shadow IT really came about when we were talking about the idea that I can't get from my own IT organization what I need. So I'm going to slap down a credit card and go buy software or go buy what I need, or even in some cases rack it and stack it inside of a building, not without the IT organization knowing it exists, because I need a service they can't provide me. So the term shadow IT is something where when you're looking at an organization's IT footprint, some of these have really strong shadow IT niches in their businesses that they don't monitor, maintain, or know. And the trickiness of that is those are also vulnerabilities that they're not aware of, right? So it's one thing to say you're going to slap down a credit card on Slack or Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or something, but it's another thing to say I've got a unpatched server running in the corner of a plant somewhere, right? Different mindset.
My favorite is like the hidden desktop computer underneath somebody's cubicle that is running like the Excel macro that happens to like power your entire organization.
We had them. And as the guy that ran, retail trading organizations, there were desktops running Windows 2000 machines with a big sticker on it that said a big piece of paper written on, "Do not turn this off," for the cleaning people not to turn it off. Right. And so like it's running complex trading algorithms, and it's sitting on a desk inside of it's just crazy. It was craziness. And so when people talk about, is the cloud secure? I'm like, I am happy to have that conversation all day long. It's way more secure than a Windows 2000 machine sitting under a desktop.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we might have people convinced that this sounds like a better world than having to plan their capacity and everything else. One of the questions in the chat that I see pop up is, what would your guess be on the percentage of businesses that have adopted cloud so far? And I'm going to caveat that by like, in some way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Wow, good question. I would probably say in some way, I would probably say 90%, but we have a stat that says 37% of companies believe that they've got a really defined and well cloud journey. I don't buy that, right? I think they think they do, and I think some of them think VM is cloud, and that their virtual machines are cloud, and others. But I think almost a majority have cloud at this point, whether that be Office 365, Teams, other collaboration software. I think all that's cloud. Now, whether they think of it as cloud or not, it's a really good question. But I had a client in Dallas one time where they were like, we were talking about cloud data, and the idea of putting your data in the cloud at one point was crazy talk. Now it's like, how could you not, right? But back to talk about sizing sizing data warehouses was a whole another ball game. It made a lot of people very wealthy. But the simple answer is like, well, we can't do cloud because it's not secure. Like, we have Salesforce. I'm like, oh yeah, but that's not cloud. Like, it is cloud. It's not called cloud, right? So I think a majority of companies have some sort of cloud, but the question is, does that cloud still sit in the infrastructure world from a strategy perspective, or does it sit in the business C-suite? And I think the shift we have seen is it is a strategic C-suite conversation. So if you look back even to the 80s with the .com and everything else, and companies wanted to go talk in their investor calls about, internet tie-ins and other things. What you're seeing now is they're getting asked in C-suite, what is your cloud posture? What is your DR and BCP posture? What are you doing for those things? So I think it's important that C-suite's asking those questions the same as they did for things like SOC compliance and other things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I see now too, especially with things like, I don't know about you, but I'm still working remotely. So with Zoom coming in, right, and Teams and some of these other pieces that the business side of the house uses every day that feels like cloud, it's now looking at your IT department going, why can't the rest of my applications act like this? Why can't they be available like this is? Zoom hasn't crashed on me this week, but my other stuff has. And so it's really getting the comfort level, I think, has been accelerated with this pandemic, with all the things that we've now been doing through cloud, learning through cloud, teaching through cloud. For our children, and how do I get that out of my applications that support my business as well?
It's a great point. I mean, I think, from an Accenture standpoint, right, for us, it's sort of easy. We've always been the world's biggest Teams users. Matter of fact, Julie and Judson were talking, or maybe it was Sachi, were talking about this morning on the call, but, we were doing, 600 million minutes a month of Teams audio, and probably, 60 million of video before COVID, which was big for everybody else, right? Now we're doing 1.2 to 1.3 billion minutes a month on Teams. We were able to scale that our entire organization without a blip, right? I mean, and I think, collaboration becomes natural. And the great thing about there's not a lot great about COVID, but the one thing it did is show that we can work in a more collaborative way virtually, which will lead to things like people having better lives and being able to stay home more and all those kind of things. But it is leading towards what is the business cockpit UI going to be in the future? And if you look, in my world, Microsoft used Teams as that UI and building everything off of that. And right now, Teams does look like a collaboration chat engine, but some of the stuff we've done with large retail organizations and others that completely reskin it. It doesn't look like Teams, but it's like, for store management, employee management, inventory management, those kind of things. That's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as more things plug into the ecosystem. And so, I think back to some of the things I did with some of the like the mining companies and others. When you take something to a mining person who's sitting in a mine drilling for ore, and you bring them technology that they said, how did I ever live without this? This is awesome. I can use it right away. that's good technology, right? And so we're going to start to get to where these technologies become something that feel right. It's like the first time you used Waze, right? Or the first time you used Yelp or something. It's just, wow, where was this? I knew I needed this, but how did I not come up with this, right? Everybody says the story because it's just so intuitive that how did I ever work in the old way, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how some of the folks on the call are going to be from small businesses and others are from larger organizations. Talk to me a little bit about the difference between getting started that you might see between those two.
Well, it's interesting because in some ways, small organizations have it a bit easier in that you're starting with a clean slate. But part of that also leads to the old model we used to have, which was best of breed. You may have you may buy Zoom over here, and you may buy O365 over here, and you may buy Slack over here. You may be all over the place, right? I think the key thing is thinking about putting a bet on a platform. So I'm not going to say 100% of you need to be on Microsoft, but I think you need to think about a platform view. And depending on your industry or depending on your business, which one is predominant? Because if you're going to scale your organization, and I assume you're all doing businesses to scale your organizations, you want to do something that's going to scale into your industry. So you'll see a lot of the hyperscalers, the big cloud providers, are moving into a very strong industry play. And so the question becomes, well, where am I going to place my bet? So you probably don't want to switch from one platform to the other midstream, though obviously it happens. But if you can get it right the first time, great. So I would actually put a lot of time and effort. It doesn't take a lot of money, but to really think through what is my strategy going to look like around a platform adopter, right? And then which of those are more open from a platform perspective, where I can start plugging in different pieces and parts. For example, there are retail and healthcare big software companies that if you are on Google or on Amazon, they won't warranty you because they're competing with them at the retail end, and so they get annoyed by that. There's weird things that happen in this world like that. The simple answer is they're not all like that. It's all around the back. But the thing is, think about the platform. I always think about the platform and usability, because what's going to happen is everyone's going to have an opinion, right? Mm-hmm. But as leaders, we've got to make a decision on where our platform is going to be and try to give as much flexibility to our employees as possible.
What are your thoughts on multi-cloud, cloud agnostic, and some of the other approaches that companies are taking?
I mean, I think anybody that says they're truly multi-cloud or truly cloud agnostic is a bit kidding themselves. You're going to have a primary. That primary could be a 55% primary, but the reality is you're going to have a primary. You want to have an architecture that is cloud agnostic by its nature. That means a containerized architecture where it makes sense. But containers by themselves can be expensive. So you just need to think, what am I containerizing? What am I not? And really thinking about a cloud native architecture, which means getting to one that is, that it takes advantage of the services in the cloud. So if you do decide to shift from one to the other, you're not disentangling a lot of configurations. But look, multi-cloud, Accenture is very multi-cloud because we obviously are the biggest partner with all the hyperscalers, and so we have a good chunk on each one. But what I find in most of the organizations we deal with is you have a primary and a secondary. Now, sometimes you may have and also you have an on-premise piece of that. Even to some degree, we're always going to have that, especially in some of those industries have SCADA systems and other things that need to be physically maintained. Mm-hmm. But then you start thinking, okay, what's the edge solutions I want to put in there? And so if I'm a company that deals with a lot of smart edge data, whether that be plants or pipelines or those kind of things, I really want to think through where do I place my bets around driving an edge solution that fits within my overall architecture that I can secure. So I would say that a hybrid architecture is important, but you're still going to have a primary ecosystem partner.
So when I'm trying to figure out what I want to do primary wise, what are some of the things that I need to look at to pick the right hyperscaler or partner as I'm going through this cloud journey?
I think number one, like I said, look at your industry, right? Look at if there's a predominant winner there that is driving not just winning the mind share, because some of that can be influenced with investments, but really differentiating in your industry. So, if you're in the healthcare space, look at that. If you look at Microsoft Health Cloud, does that make sense for me? And if I'm going to plug into that, am I getting the investments these big hospital systems or life sciences companies are doing? So I think you need to look at that and look at what they're putting out there and what their commitment is. I also think look at the stores, the platform stores that are available. so that you can take advantage of those things, just like you do on your Android or iPhone, where you want to go get services that provide me things that I don't have as an organization time or frankly need to produce. Why should I take my people's valuable time to take away from focusing on the business when I can get something to help me drive value? So that, to me, it gets back to look at where the industry is going, look at which one is predominant, maybe where they're putting their bets, where they're investing, where they're speaking, all those kind of things, and go ask questions. And then, and the flip side of that is see where they're investing, right? So they'll invest in you like they invest in everybody. So to say, look, I'd like to take your platform, but help me understand why I should, and have them sell to you, right? And why they're the differentiated platform, right? It's not this is a partnership. When you sign up for this, it's like a marriage. You're signing up for the long haul, and so you got to make sure that you're going to be compatible with who you're signing up for, right?
So I noticed you didn't put price in there. So talk a little bit about that. Where normally what we've seen in the past is like we look at this server compared to this server, and price is a big piece of that equation. It didn't come up in your answer. So tell me a little bit about that. Yeah,
I mean, price is always a factor, but I think here's a couple things. Number one, when it comes to hyperscalers, I think generally the prices are going to be they follow each other when it comes to pricing to some degree. And that's why I was talking about the investment side. Where are they investing and why? But I do think I had a CIO tell me, he's like, when it comes to value in the cloud, I'm fine paying more if it drives value. What I'm not fine paying for is exactly what you and I were talking about earlier, Kris, which is I'm paying for capacity I'm not using. Right. So that gets back to the strategy of how you architect things and everything else. So yes, there is the whole, what are the cloud native tools in order to manage spend? What I would recommend most people do, and obviously on the larger companies, it's easier, but you can do it on smaller companies, is really setting up policies and limits and other things. So you don't have someone leave, if you're a small company, someone leaves an AI ML switch on and you get an extra $100,000 at the end of the month, that could be devastating, right? So you want to set up limits, but all the providers offer that. I would recommend you get somebody to help you set that up and sort of put some SLAs around that, because the Wild West days of the early cloud are still there if you don't know what you're doing. And on top of that, there are some folks just they don't know, and they just click a box. And next thing you know, and if you try to read a bill from one of those providers, they're tricky, right? So you want to get with an optimization. We do it for the Global 2000 companies. We have a cloud optimization service, which is quite robust. And it even looks into things like reserved instance management and how can I resell those reserved instances if I'm not leveraging them on a spot market in order to recover some of that cost. There's a whole lot of complex things going. But for the smaller companies, it's just when you set up limits, get somebody who knows what they're doing, get them deeply trained in being that conduit for you, and maintain, what we've seen is maintain policies around how long things are up, when they get shut down, how they get shut down. Don't have them up on the weekends if nobody works on the weekends. Shut them down at 5 o'clock and people go home. If you run things 24/7 in the cloud, you're going to spend for those things, right? So just understand, have the ability to throttle that, where in the old days, frankly, our stuff was spinning 24/7, 365.
Oh yeah, I remember getting phone calls on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, and like you got to go because it's got to be fixed.
Go. And I had people, when I was running the account in Houston, right? I had people sleep, they get their family out for the hurricanes and have to sleep in the data centers, right? And get ready to swap parts and those kind of things. Those days, our people's time is more valuably spent driving business value.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the technology and how you pick a hyperscaler. One of the other things, when you're moving to the cloud, there's a change on your people and how you interact with your business teams and the operations folks that used to run your data center. How do you start prepping your organization for a shift to cloud? No,
that's a great point. I mean, it is one of those things that as leaders is a little tricky, right? Because you have, like any big transformational change, you want to sell the vision. You need to find those folks in your organization who you believe are going to be the ones everyone will turn to and say, what do you think about this? And get them on board. What I've seen this go two ways, right? There's always the stone throwers, right? The ones that are going to say, I don't like change, not while I'm still here. I've heard, all our data is going to be sitting on a table in the middle of Redmond and everybody's going to do it, and that kind of stuff. You got to knock those naysayers down, but the best way to knock them down is to get them on board. And if you're a true techie, if you're a true infrastructure person, when you see the power of what you can do, and once you're shown the ability of what you can do, what you get is actually a great a great collaboration. But just like, in the old days when I used to do call center transformations or big ERP transformations and those kind of things, you've got to find those change agents within your organization that can tell the vision. And that includes on the business side. Like, move to cloud is a business-led move, and they need to understand that. And I think it's easier now than it probably was 3-5 years ago. But I think it's getting those folks inside, and it is a change management journey that you need to take on very seriously.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel like it's the same hierarchy that you go through on any other change management. You've got the people who are immediately going to get on board and others that need to go through all the stages of grief before they're going to actually move on board. And then there are the people that are just going to leave because this isn't what they signed up for.
Right. That's right. And I have many a conversation with CIOs and others, including one in Dallas and some other places, where I'm like, look, in some ways it is these kind of transformations need a dictatorship, right? And that means there will be people that won't going to go, and you've got to try to convince them. But if you can't, you have to get them out, because, and not because they're, it's just not the right journey for them, right? Some people don't want to make that journey. That's okay. But you have to make this journey as an organization. And if they can't articulate that to your people, you need people that are going to be able to do that. It's really important. But I think that a lot of that's been weeded out at this point. We are now at the point where even I think the most jaded infrastructure, Unix mainframe person's now like, okay, I get it, right? I get it.
So let's talk a little bit about how do you get some of the full benefits of your cloud investment. And one of the questions in the chat comes up because I've heard this before. I'm going to have a multi-cloud strategy so that I can pit them against each other, and I'm going to move to the different ones to get the better price. So let's talk about switch cost. What does that look like in cloud? Yeah,
look, first of all, that's why I was trying to say you're going to have primary and secondary. Let's be realistic. That's fantasy, right? Because let me tell you why I think this is Stuart's opinion, but I think it's pretty well borne out at this point. If you can architect a little bit more multi-cloud with obviously containerization, Kubernetes, and other Dapper and other things. So that while it is more doable now, right? The most important thing is I want to put my load where it makes the most sense in the cloud. I don't really, from a hyperscaler perspective, which one is which, it really depends on my business strategy. And so what I would say is think about the architecture of how you architect it, and then think about your primary and secondary. So now when I think about primary, I'll bring my Microsoft example, but again, this applies to all of them. But if you look at Azure Arc and Azure Lighthouse and what they're trying to do, those allow you to manage workloads in AWS, Google, on-prem, Oracle, whatever. They're trying to give you the tools because they know that you're going to be multi-cloud. Satya Nadella knows that you're going to have a multi-cloud journey, and that's okay. He wants to win on services, right? And that's a win for you as an organization. You want your primary partner to be the one that aligns most with you in services. Those services could be something simple as, I have Active Directory. We're big O365 users, so I'm going to go down that path. Or you're a big D365 user or whatever. But the simple answer is you want to architect where it makes sense for containers. You want to be really careful not to over-architect and actually end up costing yourself more money, right? So it is one of those, balances that this is not a flip the switch and everything works. You need to think through that architecture. But to me, that's the most important piece. Is I think the idea of moving workloads month on month based on cost is folly, right? It's folly. And if you can architect, but you're still dealing with translation to some degree, right? So I think I would advise against that mentality.
Okay, so if that's not approach, not one we should use to get the best out of our cloud investment, let's talk about some that are. So we did some research, Sky High Hopes, Navigating the Barriers to Maximizing Cloud Value. And it said that only 37% of companies feel like they're getting the full benefit of cloud. And with COVID, and we talked about this a little bit before, it's really pushing the conversation to saying, let's get there faster, let's get more benefit. So what are some things that companies really need to do to start getting more of that benefit that they were expecting when they migrated in the first place?
I think one of them is the definition of cloud and how you define it in your organization. I think that's one of the tricky ones, is that most people, when they hear cloud, think infrastructure. So I think that's one, right? And I think as an organization, you need to understand what your cloud strategy is and have all your business executives be able to articulate what their piece of that cloud strategy is, right? It's really important. And I think that then would align back to that 37% number. I think would be much more, which would be much higher, right? So I think what's your strategy? If your strategy is to be a flexible business to compete, and you want to get to a model that's much more cloud native, perfect, right? I think you just need to start articulating it in a way that is business language as opposed to infrastructure language. And I think that'll change a lot of the answers. I think that's starting to change. I think, again, COVID changed a lot of that. We were already on that glide path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Already.
I love some of the things that we do in the center where we're bringing in, the user's point of view, we're bringing in the business's point of view, and we add the technology point of view. They're all in the same room at the same time, talking about the objectives of the organization, where we're trying to grow features, where we think the revenue is going to come from in the next year, where we're placing big bets on new features or innovation, and really getting, the tech team saying, yeah, that's doable. Ooh, yeah, remember all that spaghetti we didn't clean up last year? That's going to limit some of this, and the user person saying like, oh, people aren't going to like that. You can't take that feature away, or we tested that, it's not going to work. And really the collaboration between all three coming together so nicely to really prioritize what's going on, so that you're not moving to cloud for cloud's sake, not taking into mind what the revenue goals are for the year, and really it becomes a cohesive journey among the whole, and your business team's going, oh yeah, we have to wait for a minute because we need to get that set up so that I have more stability, or I need to make that more automated so that I can have blue-green deployments now instead of what I didn't have before. I love those conversations, especially the ahas that happen as you get them on the same page. Something I have noticed though is there's a learning curve as you get into the cloud and how your operations work now. So, how like backups and failover and watching the lights and some of those components go, and it can be a little tricky to transition those conversations. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other things you've seen as the transition happens that provides kind of a hurdle to unlocking?
Yeah, I think well, the operations one is, first of all, I couldn't agree with you more. I think when you get everybody in the room and you can talk about a broader story and really say, okay, this is a safe place, because you're gonna, like, I mean, some of those things you were saying could be perceived as negative, right? Oh, well, why we can't do that because of this? Users are gonna hate this, whatever. Get it out, right? Get it out and get to the fact. Get to okay, how do we as leaders define a path towards value leveraging the cloud? Because in the end, it's all about, look, if we could derive value without going to the cloud, okay, fine. But let's figure out what the value is and how do we build that together? I think the operations piece is important, because what you want to do is make people's lives easier, and you want to have more insight into your organization. So that's really big. I mean, I think the other one is just really changing the mindset in my mind of how to leverage cloud and how to build value. And so that's a really big one for me, in that an organization needs to understand what does cloud native mean? What does services mean? Because we all understand servers and apps. It's sort of okay, I got a thing, I put a thing on it, that thing runs, the thing goes down. But to your point around architecture and other things, yeah, you're going to inherently get some DR or some redundancy within the cloud. But okay, if you're a high availability business, you need to architect for that. If you're doing airline tickets, if you're doing retail transactions, if you're doing financial transactions, right? It's different than if you're doing batch transactions and other things, right? So I think thinking through the art of the possible and making sure that your people are trained on the art of the possible and have just an inherent drive to learn, because the services that come out from the hyperscalers and the partners that are building on the hyperscalers is exponential, right? I mean, even Kris, you and I can't keep up, right? It's why we have teams of people. I have, in my group globally, we have 40,000 people, right? Accenture globally, we have over 500,000 people. And even we can't keep up all the time with all the services that are coming out. And making sure that you at least expose that to your best cloud thinkers, so they can go, if I take that and put it in here, it differentiates from my customer, my client, and my employee, and it takes away some of the op cost or things we dealt with in the past. So I think that's just thinking in that operations / cloud first mindset, I think is really important.
Oh, absolutely. So I guess one of the other pieces in that, there's a lot of that change management. And I saw somebody in the chat, hashtag change management. Absolutely. It seems like, we've made the technology hurdle a lot lower, and now our people hurdle has gone up again. How do you teach an organization that maybe previously had been taught, it's costly to try new things. It's the innovation cycle is too long. How do you get their innovative juices revved up again, or those muscles re-energized so that they start doing things that, instead of putting all of the features in the bag, like you had to do before, because you had to do a capital request and everything went through that process. How do you get them to start thinking nimble again?
My personal way to do it is you have to find that thing that proves the point, right? So I had a company where, they were very underperforming for the fiscal year, Fortune 500 company. They had to build, they wanted to really I'm not going to give away the company name, but they really wanted to optimize some of their operations, but they had no money to do it because they were the poorest performing Fortune 500. And they had a $20 million budgeted project, estimated project, not budgeted. They didn't have the money. And they're like, if we could do that, we know we could change the life of the folks that are operating, but we can't do it. And we said, well, we think we can stand it up in 8 weeks for $200,000. And they're like, what? It's like, no, I mean, you have the data, it's all sitting in your organization. If we put it across the cloud threshold, use event management, pull up the data, whatever. So we were able to leverage the power of the cloud to show them, right? And that's, in the end, it's a show me thing, right? So whenever we did cloud transformation in the olden days, 5-7 years ago, Kris, we were trying to convince people. It's like, let's pick that one thing that was too hard to do or too expensive, or we can't get past the business case. Let's show you that it works, right? And so what I would say is, look for that proof point in your organization. It could be something as simple as Teams, or it could be something as simple as a Salesforce, or whatever. But the recommendation would be, find that thing that shows the value to the user, and then all of a sudden they'll believe in the vision, and then they'll start coming up with the ways to do it. I always equate, like hyperscalers and SaaS and PaaS providers as ingredients, as grocery stores. And like, you go to the main grocery store, you can go to the Asian grocery store, you can go to the Indian grocery store, you can go to all these different grocery stores, you can get these great ingredients, you get them to the chefs, let the chefs come up with the recipes, right? And so but if you can't get access to the stores because your organization doesn't allow the road to there, or the pipeline, or it's just too damn difficult, right? Then you got to create the service that brings it to them and makes it easy for them to be amazing chefs, and let them add the nutmegs of the world and others. And so I view it as, you've got to be able to open up the world of possibilities. And once they get a taste for it, they will never go back to bland food again.
Absolutely. I love the idea of just being able to get kind of that one thing working, and it might be as simple as like, I'm going to show you Hello World, but it's going to get there automatically, and it's going to be fully tested, and it's going to go through your system. And all I have to do is push this button to see people go like, I just pushed the button and sweet.
And that's where things like Power Apps blow me away, right? I mean, if you haven't played with Power Apps, now again, I'm on the Microsoft side of Accenture, right? But the ability for low code, no code, like literally for your business people to build code off the back of the infrastructure and what you built from a services perspective. I mean, I built one today, right? I was like, I want to build one for, when we go talk to clients and have whiteboard. So I was able to put in whiteboard and Teams and follow up and collaboration and task orient, all that stuff. And I did it in like 20 minutes. Now, I used to code. I haven't coded in decades. But the simple answer is, you start giving that power to your users, they're going to come up with some really amazing solutions. That's the power of cloud that, doesn't always require a pro programmer. We need pro programmers to do the big, heavy lifting stuff. And we need citizen programmers to do the non-heavy lifting stuff. And together, it's a perfect marriage, right?
Can you talk a little bit about data in the cloud and how it allows people to really look at data and have better decision making, and then focus more on what matters with data-backed information? Can you just expand a little bit on that power of the cloud?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, you can't separate data and cloud. It's not. So if anybody says we want to put our servers over here and our data over here, or we have a different cloud strategy from a data strategy, you can't. It's the same, because cloud is data, right? I mean, if we really boiled it down to it's all bits and bytes and event horizons and what you see come across. And so data strategies are really important. And this is where a ton of the investment and development is coming right now, as you know, Kris, whether that be on my side with Synapse or others. The ability to take the data, not just well-structured data, right? Those of us that have been around the data game for a long time remember the master data management issues of the past, and I always just joke, like I used to be in the call centers, and how do you do addresses and permits and things when it says literally someone put in, turn right at the Bob's Farm to go find this place. It's like, well, the system doesn't know what Bob's Farm is. Nobody knows Bob. It doesn't say Bob's Farm. You got to get your data to the point where you can pull what you need to pull, and then be able to get data across all your legacy and ecosystem partners in a way that allows you to see your full data estate, and then start doing AI and ML across patterns. And once you start seeing patterns, you can then start, it's like the cloud where you see a different world. And I think that's, a lot of people get worried about, they think traditionally on ETLs and other things when it comes to data, but you need to start thinking about true data differentiation for your organization, and how you leverage external data along with your internal data. And frankly, the most valuable commodity the companies have is that legacy data sitting in their systems. But today they really can't extract it in a way that is usable without spending a ton of money, right? So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. So we have a couple more minutes before we want to just open it wide for questions. So what else, Stuart, have we not talked about today that you want to land as far as getting the value out of cloud?
I mean, we touched on a lot. I think I think talent is important, right? So I think finding talent that is cloud native already or thinks cloud native is important. And marrying that up with your legacy, if you've got legacy infrastructure or legacy cloud folks in your organization, I think bringing an influx of the two together is very important. I think, like I said, I think when you talk about a primary, no matter who that is, you're going to want to really make sure that your folks are well versed in that and well trained in that and have the ability to learn, because it's going to be really important to make sure you maximize your architecture and your strategy that delivers that business value, because you're going to be much more present and on stage inside the business once you start going to cloud. And I think that's a great thing for the folks that, frankly, sat in the dark, cooled rooms, in the past, right? And so it's coming out into the light. So I think that's all important. I think talent, you can't underscore that enough. And so, when we go in to talk about large cloud transformation, and we're talking about, tens of thousands of workloads and servers, it's a big transformation, but it's still a transformation whether you have 10 servers or 10,000 servers. It is a mind shift change, and it's one where you have to be cognizant of where things are going and be able to talk to your business stakeholders about where the journey is going to go. And it always boils down to me, and this is consulting 101, but it's, it goes down to expectation management and alignment, not just executive alignment, but alignment into employees and to customers and others about what the journey is going to bring us. And if everyone's enrolled in that journey and the change management side of that journey is done well, and so go to hashtag change management, you'll get to a place that'll be a completely differentiated way you operate as a business. And it's like coming out of a storm.
And there's so many resources out there, no matter what platform you're looking at, to train and to upskill. And I feel like, when I started in cloud, a lot of the things that I learned on hardware and infrastructure and all of that stuff, it made cloud make sense. So it's not like I had to completely build brand new muscles. It was just figuring out how they applied differently in the cloud and what pieces changed. So the workforce that people have, can completely be transformed as long as they're up for the journey on making those changes. And there's so much support out there for that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things going on in the chat that I want to bring up and we can circle back to. So the first one was just the comment earlier about in the retail space, for example, there's some platforms in the retail space that like to work more with one hyperscaler than the other. Can you talk a little bit more about that on kind of how you think through some of those things when you're picking your hyperscaler?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be careful. But you look at, I think with the hyperscalers, what you need to look at is, like I said, when I really talk to folks in your industry and what they're doing, right? You just need to understand that there are some hyperscalers that are moving into some of those businesses. And those, I think you could probably see that Amazon's in the retail business. That's not me hiding anything, right? So the question is, depending on your business and what you're doing, like if you want to go work with some of the biggest retailers in the US that aren't Amazon, they're going to have requirements about who you keep, the company you keep, right? And I think if you're going to be in that side of the world, you need to understand, if I want to sell into this one organization and I have this one partner, they're going to say, we're going to go with someone else's product. And so you just need to understand that. And it's just a matter of just understanding. That doesn't mean you can't leverage the ecosystem. Just you got to be careful how you do things. And that goes for anybody. It's really, you understand the company you keep, but more importantly, it's less about the exclusionary thing. That's not what I'm talking about. It's more about what fits your industry business better. So if there's one that's a leader in health, and you're a startup in the health space, go that way. If you're in life sciences and pharmaceuticals, go that space. If you are, energy and oil and gas and utilities or metals and mining, whatever, you go in that space. And so, like, if you're in the energy business, right, in general, I mean, these are pretty big Microsoft shops. Now, they also have others, but you just go, okay, what part of that organization am I playing in? What does the landscape that I'm interfacing with look like? And if it's pure infrastructure, then maybe an AWS play is fine, or a Google play is fine, or a VMware play is fine. But if you're interfacing into the collaboration side, or into the, then you want to look at a Microsoft because of the link into to M365. So you just got to think through that as a strategy as you're picking that partner. Don't just go on who gives me a penny off more than the other person, because like I said, that pretty much washes itself out.
And would you say this is, especially when you're trying to figure out which hyperscaler to use, that's a good place to get phone a friend who's done this decision before, maybe is familiar with your industry, to help you think through some of those questions or those conflicts?
Yeah, and also, I mean, places like, Capital Factory and others are great, right? Because you can bounce that off mentors and others and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Can you put me in touch with someone? Follow the money, right? It's that simple. Follow the money. And I don't mean money, I mean investment money. Where are they investing? Follow the news releases. Follow the industry standards. Who is certified in the standards I need? I mean, if you look at, like, for example, again, in my world, with Microsoft's JEDI contract with the Department of Defense, right? That is shifting it's not just shifting the fact that the DoD deal is really big, but now all the aerospace and defense companies are being pulled into the GovCloud piece and how they interact and everything else. And so now there's this whole ecosystem that builds off of that. So just understand where the strategies are going as you're making decisions. But if you architect right, you can pivot. So don't worry that the decision you make off the get-go is going to be a binary decision. Just make sure you architect for potential movement if there's ambiguity in where you're going.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about security and compliance in the cloud. I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, but like, who owns the data? Who's responsible for security? I feel like this is one of the benefits of the cloud, just the shared security models. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's the big misnomer, right? That it got thrown out, it's public cloud and my data is going to get hacked or whatever. The simple answer is you are more secure in the hyperscalers than you are on premise, right? And anybody that says that's not the case, unless you've got a box that's not connected to the internet, or you are more secure. They spend more on security than anybody else. But the important part where you're going is you own the encryption of your data. They can't get to your data, and so that's the responsibility still owned by the organization. You own the company that you keep as an organization. We talked about that in our tech vision, every year. And so it's important that you understand the security parameters you need to have on there. But they have a ton of security protocols available to you, and the amount of investments that they're putting in security right now is astronomical. So, and Kris, you can expand on this, but I think the security tools we're able to put on are really important. More importantly, it gets to the software. The infrastructure as code, security as code model, which allows us to put a lot more defense points in our organization than we could when we had physical defense points. Because when you have physical defense points, you have different versions that have to be patched, and you have different manufacturers if you're in different locations. But with the cloud version, you're able to put literally as many as you want, control nodes, and be able to measure those control nodes, and then be able to see patterns of behavior that look fishy. Right. Mm-hmm. So what do they call it? The jetpack model, or the where it's like Stuart logs in Tampa today and logs in Malaysia 5 minutes later. Yeah. One of those is probably not Stuart, right? Unless he time traveled. So those are really powerful things that when some of the naysayers will come out and say, well, security and everything else, but it is just a misunderstanding of how security works in the cloud, and they are hiring the best talent. There is no doubt between them and folks like us who are hiring the best and brightest of the security talent. You might want to go with, again, follow the money and the talent.
Absolutely. I love some of the things that just out of the box, some of the hyperscalers offer as far as helping you understand what people are doing and where configurations have changed, and and giving you suggestions on where your security might be lax or where your roles aren't correctly defined to just really help you make sure your stuff is secure.
It's huge. I mean, if you look at identity and access management let's be realistic. Almost all the hacks, if not all the big hacks that we know of, were, if they weren't injected in by a party, which obviously we heard a little bit this week, was done by hacking personal identity, right? One way or the other, right? And that's really important to understand. So how do you identify that? And then if you look at to your point, what they're investing in and what they're doing and their cyber defense postures, and it's just amazing what they're bringing out and the tools they're giving to organizations, even of the smallest size. You get access to the same tools, and literally all you have to do is click a checkbox.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's, Kris and I know in the old days, it wasn't a checkbox, right? It was a lot of checks, not check boxes, right? And I think that's amazing because it does, frankly, secure us more than we had in the past. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I feel like it simplifies too when you're going through your certifications every year, your annual research. It makes a lot of things easier because there's reports you print out, there's stuff that you just grab that the hyperscaler provides for you. It really cuts down on some of the work that you end up having to that normally we would be pouring over months and months and months and months of pulling together.
Remember all the old ISO reports we'd have to do and the SOX compliance reports and everything else. Now those things, it's there, right? It's just there. And as long as you didn't mess it up, it's evergreen, right? That's another thing, right? Keeping things evergreen in organizations when it isn't, when I say it's not value added, it's like insurance to some degree that if you don't do it, it's going to hurt you. But it's not always that every dollar I put into security myself, if I'm going to do all that myself, I'm better putting 5 cents in and having someone else do the other 95 that covers everybody than my full dollar covering me where I know I might have holes and I can't keep it evergreen, right? So that's another big thing to think about is, okay, great. If you're fully funded security, you've got some of the best talent and you've got an unlimited budget in security, go for it. You're good. But I'm guessing most people aren't.
I see one more question in here around transitioning legacy data and what that can look like as far as cost to your organization when you're doing this migration. What are some of your thoughts about legacy data in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you define transitioning legacy data, right? I mean, some of it may be as simple as I want to get it onto the platform and just wrap it a little bit and get insight into the data with some microservices, and I'm not going to crack it open, right? I mean, where you start spending is when you start cracking stuff open, right? Mm-hmm. So you may want to move it in, get insight into it, and then as you start moving to a more PaaS or cloud native, migrating that app into something else or that data. The data cost in the cloud is not expensive. Data analytics in the cloud is actually getting cheaper and cheaper. AI and ML, depending on how you deploy it, could be expensive, but generally, if you do it right, that expense is pure value add, so you don't really care. Right. I mean, that expense is something good. Now that's a generalization. So I know if there's a data scientist on there, they're probably putting in the chat right now, oh, what about this thing? But I think, legacy data, there were the days of we would say we want to transform everything and make it all pretty before we move it in the cloud. Those days are gone. Mm-hmm. Right. I think you want to lift and shift as much stuff in as you can, as quickly as you can, and get it under the cloud umbrella for 2 reasons. One, because you can get it under that secure infrastructure we were talking about. Well, 3 reasons. Get into that secure infrastructure, be able to get some insight on that data more quickly. And more importantly, the hyperscalers will pay to get you in there, right? They'll invest in that load, and you can use some of that money to transform that legacy data into cloud native data. So it's a complicated question without knowing the specifics, and I'm not a data guy at the specifics, but the simple answer is, get it. If you get into a cloud, get that data in, get it transformed, get it leveraged, get it into the right cloud tiering posture from a data perspective, and then go off and running. If you haven't started playing with if you haven't looked at Azure Synapse and some of the stuff that's coming, data revolution is here. But the next 3 years is going to be unbelievable. It's the data is the next big revolution that we're already in the middle of right now. And we'll look back on this and say, how did we ever have these big data warehouses like we used to in the past?
Absolutely. I don't see any other questions coming in on the chat, so I'll just give it a second and see if anybody else has any last minute things they want to ask or any clarifications. Let's see, maybe come in, give a minute. It's always the fun part. Data. Okay, got a comment, so with chats are working. Well, Stu, I want to thank you so much for joining me today to chat about cloud. As always, the time has flown by, as it does when we get together to talk about cloud. So how can people reach out to you if they have questions?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I assume the same with you, Kris. We're both out there, so feel free to reach out and LinkedIn to us. It's in the Microsoft ecosystem, so it's all good for me. Happy to help, and obviously thrilled to do this. I mean, I think it's important to get the word out. I mean, Kris, and you and I do this all the time in front of clients, and I love where you went with the idea of the safe ideation space, right? The ability to really think about leaving the old things at the door and thinking about the art of the possible. To me, is why I love being in cloud. I mean, 26 years in Accenture, and being able to move in the cloud business probably 10 plus years ago and bring that consulting brain that I had into the cloud world. And I haven't stopped. Every day is unbelievably amazing. And so what I would tell you is take advantage of it, ride the cloud, find out what you can do, transform your business. Don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Kris or others, but ask mentors and friends and the folks in Capital Factory, ask what they're doing, and then challenge some of that thinking. Right? When people say we can't do because, when you hear the negative words come out, think about how you can sort of come back and say, but what if we did this? Wouldn't that be different? And what you'll find is 9 times out of 10, you can do it. Just be that change agent.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can reach me on LinkedIn as well. I think one of my favorite things to tell people is, you move from challenge to challenge accepted. In this place, and it becomes so impactful to your business partners that they start coming to you with more of their challenges, so that you can accept them and move past them with them together. I love those thoughts.
Agreed.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you on LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks, Kris.